Great. So, hi everyone, and I'll give you your mic. My name is Jacob DeSwan-Harris. I'm the president of Colby Democrats and a senior here at Colby. We're extremely excited to welcome Secretary Bellows to campus today. I'd like to extend a big thanks to Amy Weinstock for helping me plan this event over the last few months. And one cancellation, so we're all very happy that you guys were able to make it to the rescheduling. To those of you coming from our surrounding community, welcome. Thank you for coming. We're delighted to share the space with you all and hope to continue to strengthen the bond between Colby Dems and our neighbors. Colby students, thank you for coming. I'm sure you all know this by now, but this is actually the 6th installment of our Senate and Governor's Candidate Speaker Series. On April 23rd, we'll be closing the series out with former Maine CDC Director and former Colby Professor, actually, Dr. Nirav Shah. If you can't make it, don't worry. All these events, including this one, will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. There you can also find our past events with Troy Jackson, Grant Plattner, Angus King III, Hannah Pingree, and Governor Mills. I want to say clearly that the Colby Democrats are not endorsing any particular candidate. In what is likely one of the most important election years in Maine's recent history, it is our goal to provide students with the opportunity to learn, to ask questions, to become involved with the political process. We understand that nowadays politics are full of strong emotions and strong opinions. Still, we hope that this event can be a productive space where people can engage thoughtfully, with an open mind, and most importantly, without disruptions. Now, one last legal hurdle I have to read for the school. This is a Colby Democrat-sponsored event. The use of Colby College facilities or resources for this event does not constitute support by the college in favor of or in opposition to any candidate. The views expressed here are the views of the speaker, not of Colby. Now, to introduce our lovely speaker quickly. Born in Hancock, Maine, Shenna is actually a fellow NESCAC grad, studying international politics and economics at Middlebury, which is exactly what my brother is studying there right now. Yeah. After graduating, Shenna volunteered with the Peace Corps in Panama, and later also with the AmeriCorps to develop public housing in Nashville. After working for several years for the ACLU in DC, who are doing very important work there right now, I'm sure you all know, Shenna went on to serve as the executive director of the ACLU of Maine from 2005 to 2013. 2016, Shenna won a seat in the state Senate, representing a district that also voted for Trump for 2 terms. And in 2021, Shenna was, of course, made history by becoming Maine's first female Secretary of State. It's a great honor to have you here to answer our questions, so please join me in welcoming Secretary of State Shenna Bellows.
Jacob, that was a great intro. Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I look forward to this conversation. I'm going to share a little bit about who I am, why I'm running, and what's at stake. But I'm going to start with a story. So this is actually my 3rd time at Colby. I've worked with Colby Democrats and Colby Votes on voter registration events. Colby does a spectacular job every year of getting the campus registered, which is really exciting. And also spoke at the Goldfarb Center. We had a town hall last year looking at issues of democracy in my role as Secretary of State. So Maine is unique. Maine is like one large small town. We have a very strong and vibrant democracy. We're one of the best states in the nation for voter participation. And in 2024, I was faced with a really challenging decision because Maine has this quirky law that says that the Secretary of State shall enforce the qualifications of every candidate for office. And it's enforced if a group of citizens brings a challenge to that candidate's qualifications. So, heading into the 2024 election, a group of Maine citizens brought a challenge to the qualifications of Donald Trump because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution says that no candidate for federal office shall have engaged in insurrection. So the citizens brought the complaint. The law said that the Secretary of State shall hold the hearing within a week. So I invited both sides. They both had attorneys. And then the law said the Secretary of State shall issue a decision within a week. So I heard both sides. I listened to the evidence. And I determined that, in fact, January 6th was an insurrection. And so I ruled that Donald Trump was not eligible for the ballot. Now, what happened next? I was doxxed. My personal information placed on the dark web. Trump actually tweeted about the decision. People were encouraged to threaten me and to harass me. Law enforcement recommended that me and my husband go and live in a safe house because of the level of the threats. So we did. And we were swatted. And a fake emergency call designed to elicit a SWAT team response to our home. But every day in that safe house, I woke up and I drove to the office and I did my job to protect our elections. When the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the states could not determine the qualifications of federal candidates, only Congress could, we put Trump on the ballot because I'm a law and order candidate. But I have been fighting for our democracy ever since. Last summer, when the Trump Department of Justice said that they wanted your sensitive personal voter information, I said, hell no. Go jump in the Gulf of Maine. And I then went to a meeting of secretaries of state in Mississippi to recruit other secretaries of state to join a coalition to protect sensitive personal information. Last week we were in court because the Justice Department sued Maine first. The case is USA versus Bellows. We were in court last week arguing for voter privacy, arguing for state sovereignty, that the states, not the federal government, are in charge of elections under Article 1 of the Constitution. And our coalition numbers 30 states, including Idaho and West Virginia and Kentucky and New Hampshire. So not just blue states, but red states as well, all standing up on the constitutional principle that we don't have kings in America. We have a democracy rooted in state power. Amen. So when I surged in Maine, and I actually talked to the Inclusion Conference today, it was a group of employers all across the state looking at how we make Maine a place where immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers, people of color, people with disabilities, every Mainer feels welcome and included in our economy. So I was speaking about my experiences when I surged in Maine with a grotesquely named Operation Catch of the Day. A week before they came, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol reached out and they asked for undercover license plates. And again, I said, hell no. We don't have secret police in a democracy. And again, I was doxxed. And I got a death threat. I got harassed. But again, I didn't back down. And that time they didn't sue me, and the Supreme Court didn't tell me that I had to do that. So I think it's really important in these challenging times that we have leaders who won't back down, who won't cave no matter what, who will stand up for the rule of law, for our democracy, and for our elections, no matter what the personal cost. If you want a governor who will stand up for Maine, choose the only candidate who's already done so at great personal cost. Now, I get that courage, if that's what you call it, or stubbornness, as we call it in rural Maine sometimes, from my parents. When I was 4 years old, my parents bought a piece of land in Hancock, Maine. My sister was 3, my brother was 2. They pitched a tent on that land. My father was a self-employed carpenter. He went every day to work on people's houses. My mother was working in a factory, a light bulb filament factory in Sullivan. And in their spare time, with 3 kids, they dug out an old cellar hole. And we lived in that basement the following year. And I remember the basement because one night a storm came in and water started coming into the basement. So we piled into our one vehicle and we drove an hour to Bangor where my uncle was living. This is before cell phones. I know it's hard to believe. And the door was locked and he wasn't home. So we had to turn around and we drove another hour to the town of Goldsboro where we had some family friends. And they were home and they let us in and that's where we spent the night. So I'm passionate about universal housing for all because if you don't know where you're sleeping at night, everything else falls away. Now, I entered into kindergarten at Hancock Grammar School. I had a lisp, but I had free speech therapy in school and great school teachers. And we were really poor. We didn't have electricity or indoor plumbing until I was in the 5th grade. That was a great year. I worked my way through high school and college. I waited tables. I was a Subway sandwich artist. I worked in the kitchen of a lobster pound. But, you know, those public schools, strong communities, that's why I'm standing here today as your first female Secretary of State. And I think that gumption, that work ethic, that ability to persevere no matter what's going on around you, that's how I come by my courage in standing up for democracy. Now, I'm running because I believe we're in a perilous moment for our democracy. Voter registration, because of Colby votes, because of Colby Dems, is strong here in this state. We were number 1 on my watch in 2022. I was really proud of that. In 2024, we initiated online voter registration so that students could register to vote from their phones or an iPad, and 35,000 plus Mainers registered to vote that year. So our democracy is strong here in our state. But what's happening in Washington, and I was delayed today because Bondi got fired, right? So I was doing an interview with Bloomberg about what's happening in Washington and what's not happening in Washington. Is truly terrifying, right? Trump is threatening to nationalize our elections. Not only are they coming after our voter data, but they're threatening to deploy ICE to the polling places. And so we're in conversations with attorneys, with advocates, with law enforcement about how we protect the elections from the federal government. Think about that for a minute. And so it's a very dangerous moment for democracy. We need tested, experienced leaders who won't cave and who won't back down. But it's also a really scary moment for our friends and neighbors who are really struggling economically. The wealth disparities are insane, and believe me, I've lived it. My parents didn't have health insurance for most of their adult lives. My mom, she worked in a greenhouse for over 20 years with no benefits. At age 49, she went back to school. First she did adult ed, then the University of Maine at Augusta, then the University of Maine at Orono. She became a home health care nurse. Ironically, it was when she went to school that she had adequate health coverage for the first time. My dad, he got health insurance with the Affordable Care Act. But the point is, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is wider than it has ever been in our history. And as I travel around the state, the idea that a couple of young 20-something-year-olds who had dropped out of college, who were working blue-collar jobs in a factory or as a carpenter, could afford to buy a piece of land, that is completely out of reach for anyone. It's out of reach for young professionals. I talked to a mom, her son's an architect, and he's living at home. He can't afford to live in the housing that he is designing in Greater Portland, right? I talked to a gentleman, and he's like, oh, your dad was a carpenter? My son-in-law's a carpenter. His wife's a teacher. They're using the food pantry because they can't make ends meet. And when I have been talking to teachers around the state, that teacher isn't the only one, right? Working full-time, teaching our kids, using the food pantry. I talk to young people. I talked to a couple in Presque Isle, and they said, we have 2 kids, we can't afford a third. We can't afford health insurance, we can't afford childcare. 2 folks working full-time. I talked to another couple in Portland. They said, we're never going to be able to afford our own house. And they had master's degrees. So something has to change. And here's the other quality that I bring to this. Lived experience. Understanding what it's like to struggle. And understanding how to practically change government. So I ran for the state senate in 2016, and I won this Trump district, not because I'd been head of the ACLU, or a longtime leader on marriage equality, or an organizer for reproductive freedom, or a founder of the Maine Immigrants' Rights Coalition, or the first federal candidate in the country to endorse legalization of marijuana back when it was illegal, before it was cool to be supportive of decrim. None of those things were the reasons that those Trump voters voted for me. Why did they vote for me? Because they were pissed off. They were concerned about finding good jobs. They were concerned about property taxes and taxes in general. They were worried about businesses and the state of our schools. They were worried about health care and not being able to afford to get care when they were sick or when loved ones were sick. And I promised I would fight for them. And I won. And in the state senate, I worked on those issues, those economic justice issues that unite everybody. I worked on property tax relief. I worked on a bill to feed kids with breakfast after the bell. I actually got a bill signed by Governor Paul LePage to streamline medical licensing to bring more doctors into the state. And so I got reelected. And this time around, I chair the Labor and Housing Committee. I brought the first bill to create the first recovery residence in the whole state, under the idea that we need recovery housing for people struggling with substance use disorder. Now there are 121 recovery residences because of that bill, because of that work we did. I brought a bill, again, having failed the first time under LePage to get him to sign off on expanding the school lunch program and school breakfast. I brought a bill to fund school meals, and I got breakfast after the bell passed that year. I brought bills with Republican friends. I co-sponsored the Green New Deal for Maine. And that we got things done. And I got reelected again, even though my 11 towns had voted for Donald Trump in 2024 again. I kept getting reelected by those independent and Republican voters because I was focused on things that they cared about too. And that's what I will do as our next governor. Because here's the thing, housing, we need to keep building more housing. That's something the legislature has actually made good progress on. We need to think about what it's actually like for people that don't have savings of thousands of dollars, much less $20,000 or $100,000 for first month and last month's rent and a security deposit for a safe, stable apartment, much less a first home. That's why I'm so passionate about programs that help get people into rental housing that is safe and secure, where the state backs that first and last month's rent and the security deposit so that we can get people out of the streets and into homes. The first-time home buyers program. Some folks say, oh, let's give people a discount on their down payment. A discount? Good luck if you're a recent college graduate having any sort of down payment for your first home. That's why we really need to double down on the first-time home buyers program. Fold that down payment into a mortgage. Have the state back it, just in case there's some sort of failure. But then let's get young people into their first home so they can build equity. And what about some cooperative housing? Dorms here in Colby are pretty great, right? Like, dorm life is not terrible. Oh, what about building in a new way? Smaller units, cooperative housing, perhaps housing where people can build equity in that co-op and have a nest egg to then go out on their own. And let's do that for seniors too. Right? There are plenty. Maine is demographically the oldest state in the nation. But there are lots of folks who want to age in place in their community, but their big old farmhouse isn't maybe meeting their needs anymore. So let's build smaller scale, community-based senior housing where people can stay in their communities and move out of their homes and open up that housing for the next generation. I'm also proposing a housing corps, because if you look at the unemployment numbers, especially what Trump is doing to this economy and the war with Iran, things are not looking good. Peace Corps and AmeriCorps were great options for me. It helped me get into mission-based work. I'm proposing a housing corps for me, so that if you're a young person and you want to get involved in solving the affordable housing crisis and learn some practical skills in carpentry and electric and the trades and plumbing, you can go to work for the state for 2 years and help rehabilitate derelict housing. There's actually a land trust right here in Waterville that's doing some of this work. They're buying up derelict housing, rehabbing it, putting an affordability lien on it, getting it back into the market. Let's have the state do that and teach young people skills at the same time. Worst case scenario, you get out of that program and you're going to be really good on your own home. Best case scenario, it helps us get more people into the construction industry, which is a huge need in our state. So that's housing. Education. We need to pay teachers more. We need to pay teachers enough that Colby grads look at education and say, that is what I want to do, and I know that if I'm a teacher in Maine, not only am I not going to need to use the food pantry, but I'm going to be able to afford my first home. I'm going to be able to have a family and have a vacation and live and work and prosper in our state. And I think the state needs to pick up the slack. We have underfunded schools for decades now. We've put it on the backs of property taxpayers. And so we see these fights over 20 school districts rejecting their budgets, rejecting these little tiny increases. We see layoffs of teachers all over the states when we need more teachers. And that's because the taxpayers, they can't take it anymore. So I'm proposing that we freeze property taxes for Maine residents, and we pay for it by doubling the property taxes for non-residents, the 1 in 6 Maine homes that are vacation homes in our state. And that will bring in a huge amount of revenue. Imagine doubling the property taxes on those $1 million mansions. Well, it's not just millions, it's hundreds of millions of dollar mansions on the coast to bring in more revenue to help us tackle some of these big solvable problems in housing and healthcare. Now, some folks are going to say, oh, that's not constitutional. Oh, that's not really. Look. The reason we haven't done it yet is people are scared. Well, I was head of the ACLU. We were always doing things that people said were impossible. And this was a long time ago. But, you know, in 2004, the elections, people are like, ooh, you can't back LGBTQ equality. That's what lost Kerry the election. That was bullshit. But you know what? I came to Maine, and I helped run the Maine Won't Discriminate campaign. We ended discrimination in housing, in education, and credit. And then we started working on marriage equality. And there were lots of people that were like, ooh, this is really scary. People are going to lose elections because of it. And we're like, no, we're going to get this done. And we did. So when it comes to my property tax proposal, let's do it. And I dare a non-resident to sue us. And then maybe they will. And maybe the law court will find it unconstitutional. You know what we'll do then? We'll pass a constitutional amendment, which, as secretary, by the way, I have helped to do. We used to have a portion of the Constitution that was secret. Maine was the only state in the country that had a secret part of our Constitution, the Wabanaki Treaty obligations. As secretary, I partner with the legislature because as secretary, I print the Constitution. And I was like, why are we doing this? Why do we have a secret part of the Constitution that the secretary cannot print? And so we brought a constitutional amendment and we got it passed. So if the Constitution is wrong, if the law court tells us something's not constitutional, let's just change it. Let's not just say we can't do something. Trump doesn't say, is this constitutional? Should I do this? We need some boldness. We need some creativity. And here's the other thing. You know, the Republicans are right when they say we need to cut red tape and make government more efficient. I ran for Secretary of State to make elections, to modernize elections, and to modernize the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, which I run. My name is on all of your licenses. So you can remember Shenna Bellows. I was working late today because of Bondi getting fired, so I didn't bring my signs. But you can remember Shenna Bellows because you can take out your driver license and look and see the name right above the photo. But I ran to modernize the BMV and elections. In my first term, I implemented automatic voter registration. So if you do go to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, you can register to vote at the same time. But I was doing my listening tour, and I was like, what are these lines? And they're like, well, you know, it's walk-in, first come, first served. I was like, that's great. We love walk-in service. But what about appointments? They're like, oh, we've never done appointments. Okay. Now we have online appointments. Go online. You can get in and out in 5 minutes. We did that in my first term. The car dealers were like, Shenna, you're killing us. We can't move cars off our lots because everything is paper-based. It takes months to get an answer back to you for vehicle titles. It's a very obscure issue, but a big deal to that industry. Yeah. We implemented an electronic lien and titling solution. So my second term, I was like, let's do online voter registration, which we did. We got rid of our fax machines for the insurance industry. I kid you not, we had a cash register at our headquarters. And if you were in the car insurance industry, you had to send things to us by mail or by fax. So we got rid of that. So you could do it electronically. So we cut so much red tape, so much bureaucracy at the BMV that we've been saving millions of dollars every year. We connected our license system to all other 50 states. So if you're a Colby student and you're like, you know what, I love Maine, I want to get a Maine license, I'm staying here forever, we can pull your record from another state. So if you have a little, dust up in another state, we now know. But also it makes it more efficient for you. That was something that we did on my watch. So I think the next governor needs to modernize Maine state government. We're going to need to find ways to save money in economic hard times, right? Because we need to put more money into our schools. And I haven't touched healthcare yet. I'm going to finish there and then take questions. But we need to find ways to save money. We need to find ways to cut our budget. And the best way to do that, and I've done it in the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, is modernization. And if I can modernize the BMV, I promise you I can modernize other aspects of state government, and no other candidate can say that. So let's talk about healthcare. So whether it was the basement or the kerosene lamps or genetic luck of the draw, I have really bad asthma. And the emergency rooms in Ellsworth and Blue Hill have saved my life more than once. And I believe no one should be sick because they are poor or poor because they're sick. We need universal, single-payer health care for all. And again, people will say, the states can't do that. We gotta wait for Washington. Well, good luck with that. Good luck. I mean, they've been saying that for decades now, quite frankly. I think we need a governor who will come in and create a plan. One of the benefits of Maine is we are small enough to get everybody in a room together, the hospital CEOs, the doctors, get everyone in a room together and figure out what would it take. How could we do it? We're not going to get it done in 1 year or 2 years. It's probably an 8 to 10 year plan. How can we coordinate with other states? I coordinate with the secretaries of state from other states every single day on issues of democracy. I coordinate with other bureaus of motor vehicles across the country. We should be looking at healthcare and thinking about solutions, not what we can't do, but what we can do. And in the short term, we need to take some of that property tax revenue, and oh, by the way, I support a millionaire's tax, because you know what? Our nurses and plumbers right now are paying the same effective tax rate as our millionaires and billionaires, and that is not right. So with that extra revenue, we need to shore up healthcare infrastructure. The closure of inland, the closure of birthing centers. If you're a recent Colby grad, would you go to Holton or to Bar Harbor if you knew that you wouldn't be able to have a baby in your community because they closed the birthing centers? That you might have to take a life flight or an ambulance if something is unexpected? No, that would be counterintuitive. We need hospitals in every community across our state. We need birthing centers within a half hour of where people want to live. We need community health centers so people can access primary care. And those are things that will be in my first budget because the payer mix isn't working. This reimbursement structure that we have is not working. The hospitals, they are millions of dollars in debt because of the actions of the state. So let's save some money on bureaucracy and put it into keeping our hospitals open and having healthcare infrastructure across our state. So that's just some of what I believe. I could talk all day. I won't, but I'd love to take your questions. But here's the thing. As a state senator, as Secretary of State, I've always been solutions-oriented. I will work with anyone to get things done. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I first got involved in Democratic politics when my dad brought me to a Democratic convention in Presque Isle, Maine. It was amazing. I never forgot it. But we had a saying at the ACLU, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent principles. And I think that is what's going to carry us through. A solutions-oriented, can-do focus, experience navigating budgets, navigating legislation, and that willingness to work with anyone to help support the future of Maine. Thanks very much. So I'm happy to take questions. Yeah.
We have an extra microphone. So
Great.
Anybody has a question? I would like to
Go for it.
if that's okay. Selfishly, it's great to have all the governor's candidates come because then you get to ask questions you care about.
Great.
But, so a lot of students in Colby, including myself, I study environmental policy, very concerned about climate change. And it feels like in the politics of today, it can kind of be an issue that gets pushed to the background a little bit. So, especially with Maine having super high electricity bills, how do you still see the vision with renewable, a new clean renewable future, and are there any specific policies or plans you have to pursue that?
Yes. And like you, I'm really passionate about sustainability and confronting climate change. So I graduated from Middlebury in 1997, which is a long time ago, and I wrote my thesis on economic and environmental sustainability in an era of climate change. And it is really pathetic that we have not made more progress in all of that time. Now, my career took me into democracy and civil rights, I did some work for Sierra Club for a year. I worked on solar energy and passenger rail and trying to stop strip mining in our state. And I volunteered on the Manchester Conservation Commission for years. But here's my plan. My economic New Deal for Maine includes electricity affordability. We should be capping the return on investment, the profits of the power companies at 6%. Right now they're getting double-digit profits. They're making so much money off of Maine. In fact, there was a newspaper article that found that the regulators found that they were overcharging and that somehow they were going to try to reimburse the states. We should be capping those profits and be tougher on them up front. The second thing, I love the investments in heat pumps, in weatherization, and in solar that the state has done. But we have a system of tax credits for solar and for EVs. Now, that's great. If you can afford to put solar panels on your home or to buy an EV, you get a tax credit at the end of the year. But my family growing up, there's no way they ever could have afforded putting that solar installation on their roof, right? So I'm proposing in my economic New Deal for Maine that the state do direct installation of solar panels on LIHEAP eligible homes. Those are the homes that we send checks for oil and gas to them every single year. Let's give those senior citizens and low-income folks easy access to the benefits of solar energy and the reduced electricity rates that comes with that by doing that installation. Because the tax credit, like most retirees in Maine, not most, because we do have this gap between the haves and the have-nots, but many retirees in Maine are never going to be able to afford the solar installation themselves. So I think we should really go big on solar. Bill McKibben is someone I really admire. He has a book called Here Comes the Sun. I really think, especially with the war in Iran, and what you're seeing with the spike in oil prices and natural gas as well, we are going to see some real shocks. And quite frankly, renewables are more affordable than oil and gas. And so it's really important that we think about how do we increase affordability and protect the environment at the same time. The problem is the way our policies have been constructed, it's created this gap between affordability and sustainability. And it's created this tension. So a lot of Trump voters, they're pissed. They're pissed about the solar tax credits. They're pissed about the EV tax credits. So let's restructure our policies so that it benefits the working class too, so that everyone benefits from making progress on our climate goals. And that's, I think, a lens that I have that others don't necessarily because of my lived experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I have like a little story part to the question.
Great.
So I'm currently working as a volunteer in an elementary school, like 15 minutes away from Colby. And my student, she's in 5th grade, she was telling me about this essay that they all write called The Future of Maine essay. I don't really know much about it, but she was telling me that when she writes it, she writes 2 colleges that she really wants to go to, and if she wins the prize, she gets $100 for college. So she has a lot of faith right now in the state of Maine, and really hopes to become a veterinarian and she wants to go to Colby. But I think that those things wouldn't be possible unless she has support from the state and from colleges. So I was wondering what are some of the ways that you'll be able to support these younger students to kind of keep the faith in Maine as they get older and want to kind of pursue other jobs other than maybe trades.
Yeah, so I think the free community college program is really important, and I'm really glad that the legislature voted actually just this week to protect that program, because, you know, I think about when I graduated from college, and granted, SCAC school, it's going to be expensive, right? But my student debt was more than my parents were making combined at the time. So I was really panicked. I went to work for a big economics consulting firm first to just pay down my debt. And I did pay it off. It took me 10 years to do so. But I think for a lot of students growing up in Maine, the idea of college or the idea of attaining those dreams, graduate school, for example, it's just out of reach, just thinking about what those costs are. So I think making sure we keep free community college, but also having an equivalent plan for the university system. Because if she wants to go to be a veterinarian, I mean, Colby would be amazing, and Colby has good supports for low-income students. But if she can't achieve that, then we need her to come to the University of Maine. And we need to create pathways for her to do that, like we're doing right now for the Free Community College System program. I think that's really important. The other thing, I think for young people to stay and live and work in Maine, and I'm curious what you all think, but I think we need universal childcare and universal health care and increased supports for more housing. I think those are kind of the three big things. Because, some of you are going to be entrepreneurs, you're going to start your own businesses, you're going to start your own nonprofits. Some of you are going to be the next generation of leaders and managers that Maine desperately needs in our state. We have so many vacancies emerging as we have this aging population. And we have so many resources with our marine economy, our forest products economy. There is so much economic opportunity here in Maine. What's missing are some of those basic supports so that you can afford to live. We've offered people jobs. We're big on recruitment at the Secretary of State's office. I'm like, come work for me. And I mean that. When you graduate, come work for me. But we've had people turn down jobs because they couldn't find housing in Augusta. It's not even talking about Portland. They just couldn't find a place to live, and so they've turned down the job in Maine and gone to a different state. And that's talent that we're losing because we don't have affordable housing. And I think, again, when people are faced with that question of okay, I want to start a family, do I stay in Maine or do I go elsewhere? Without those supports of childcare and healthcare, I'm not sure that decision makes sense right now, right? But we also need to make sure that she has good teachers at her level. And I think we should be streamlining, I really think we should be rethinking how we certify teachers and how we support student teachers. I was talking to a student teacher. She doesn't get paid for her hours. She has to pay for the gas to go back and forth. She's working full time, she's going to the university, she's trying to get her student teaching hours in, and it's taking her a long time because it just takes her that much longer because she has to do all of these things. So I really think we need to be thinking about those pipelines of new teachers too. So, yeah.
I really appreciate you talking about universal housing, universal childcare, universal healthcare. I personally believe that economic issues like that are going to be one of the biggest uniting issues across the political divide we're seeing in this country. Something that is concerning to me is that even with Democrats in the majority in Congress and with the executive branch in Maine is still a very moderate state, and I think common denominator is obviously often cost. You mentioned raising property taxes on vacation homes. I'm wondering, are there other opportunities to raise that sort of money? Do you anticipate pushback from your Democratic colleagues on spending on those things that people need? And what are your plans to resolve that tension?
Yeah. So I think we need to recruit Republicans to the coalition of the willing to advance those goals, because I agree with you that that's a potential uniting factor. And I'm the only candidate in the race that's gotten unanimous support for my budget. Again, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. I pitched a strategic plan with modernizing, with cutting red tape, making government more efficient, with saving dollars at the BMV but improving customer service. And, despite the fact that Republicans tried to impeach me twice over the Trump thing and threatened to impeach me again this winter, they voted unanimously for my BMV budget just this week. And why? Because it made sense. And because I reached out. In fact, right after the impeachment, I literally went to the Transportation Committee and shook all of their hands. I was like, look, I know you didn't really like what I did with Trump. I wasn't a real fan of the impeachment hearing, or it wasn't a hearing, it was a vote. But can we talk about modernization? And so I think that's what it takes. I also think it takes communicating everywhere, not just in forums where there are like-minded people. And I love the Colby Democrats, and thank you for organizing. But I go on talk radio a lot, conservative talk radio. After I made the ICE decision, I called the conservative talk radio host. I was like, hey, I want to be on your show on Monday morning. I want to talk about why I did this. And after I threw Trump off the ballot, I was touring polling places. I was in Bucksport, Maine. It's represented by a Republican House member and a Republican senator. And this guy comes barreling up to me. Are you Shenna Bellows? I did not say, no, it's Shenna, rhymes with Jenna. I didn't say that. I was like, yeah. He said, I hear you on the radio all the time. I was like, yeah? And I kid you not, he said, you and Donald Trump are my favorite politicians. And I was like, know. And he said, I don't always agree with you, but you say what you mean. And I think that is a way of connecting with conservative voters. Now, you asked, how would I get my fellow Democrats to agree? Well, that budget was unanimous for the Democrats, too. And I think it takes conversation. It takes coalition building. And I think that's how I was able to get legislation passed when I was in the minority, when Republicans controlled the Senate that I was serving in, and LePage was governor, is how I got a lot of things passed when I was in the majority with Mills as the new governor and chairing the Labor and Housing Committee. I'm really committed to that idea that we can bring people together. Now, I'm not shy. I'm very progressive. I think I'm the most progressive in the race. 100% record with Planned Parenthood, 100% record with Maine conservation voters, 100% record with the unions, 100% record with Equality Maine. I marched in I organized a March for Women's Lives. 20 years ago, I've spoken at probably hundreds of rallies. I never hid that when I was representing a Trump district. I was just myself. And I think sometimes in politics we miss that, right? Part of the reason people are so pissed off is they feel like politicians are fake, right? They feel like politicians are like, ooh, is this gonna pull well? Yeah. Just say what you mean. And then figure out where people agree. When I was a state senator, I knocked on doors, and I knocked on 10,075 doors my first race while working full-time as a nonprofit executive director for an educational nonprofit called Learning Works. And so I did it every night and every weekend, just kind of like I'm doing right now. And, I'd ask people, what do you care about? And if the first thing out of their mouth was I'm anti-abortion, I'd be like, okay, what else do you care about? Or if the first thing that they said was, I hate immigrants, I'd be like, well, what else do you care about? And usually that second issue was something we could agree on. And I think you gotta figure out what that second issue is for people. Thank you. Yeah. Other questions?
May take a roundabout route to get there, but...
That's okay. I took a roundabout route too.
Thank you for being here today. Okay. So it's very clear from what you've been saying that you play well and work well with others across all the aisles. I'm just wondering have you already put thought into, so when you get home at night and you get your diary out and you're writing, Dear Diary, my wish list for my cabinet when I become governor.
Oh, I love this.
Is, you don't have to name names, but will you put people in there who actually are qualified to be cabinet directors?
Yes. And if you've been to all of these town halls, and it sounds like Colby Dems have organized a lot, and thank you, then you've heard some really good ideas. I've said very publicly, I see some of my competitors as excellent potential cabinet members, or at least leaders in my administration in various capacities. I think the Lincoln model of team of rivals is a really good one. I think it's about finding the smartest people for the job. And as Secretary of State, I've hired excellent leaders. Leaders, sometimes from the different parties, or whose party I don't even know, who have helped me implement this vision for modernization. And I think that's, having been a nonprofit CEO, and then Secretary of State running a department, a large department of over 400 people, I have a lot of experience hiring and firing. Sometimes people are not qualified, and you might like them, but they're not the right person for the job. But I think hiring talent, I think that's actually one of my talents. And having a leadership, having an administration that represents the people we represent, right? I was at the Wabanaki Alliance forum, and I spoke to my passion for tribal sovereignty and my commitment to introducing tribal sovereignty on day one, because I worked very closely with the tribal chiefs in the Wabanaki Alliance and Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness and others for years. But when one of them asked, will we put a Wabanaki person in the leadership of your administration? And the answer is absolutely, yes. That is really important that we have representation.
Thank you.
Hi, Shenna. Just as a fellow Peace Corps person, I want to thank you for mentioning that, because for younger people, it's a life-changing experience, and it's also a way to get sometimes off the merry-go-round, in grad school, and how am I going to get a job? And I certainly changed my life.
Where did you serve?
It's Congo now, but it was Zaire.
Wow.
Really, it was, an unfortunate country.
Yeah.
But, my question was, and I came here to ask this question, and you led off talking about the possibility of Trump federalizing the elections and sending ICE people to the election, the polling places. And I'm wondering, are there any realistic strategies that are possible to prevent that from happening? And also, what protections would I, as a voter going, if I'm walking up to my polling place, am I going to have to first hand my paper, my documents, identification over to a masked ICE person like they're having to do now? Well, they're not masked maybe, but at the airport.
No, you will not. And here's why. So it's been a really busy week. On the 31st, Trump issued a new executive order because he's desperate. He's terrified. He knows he's going to lose hugely in 2026. And he's still obsessed. He's like the country's biggest loser. He's still obsessed with his losses of 2020, right? And so this executive order really, is part of that plan to nationalize elections. And he's made no secret of what he's trying to do. And my response to that executive order is, we're not going to comply. We're not going to follow it. The Constitution says the states, not the federal government, are in charge of elections. And that is really important. Non-compliance, a refusal to do what the president tells you to do just because he's the president, is a really important part of the resistance. We can't just go to court and say, oh, we don't want to do this. You do need to go to court. I have a long history of leading lawyers in litigation. That's really important. But even before you do that, you do not comply. So there is a federal, not only does the Constitution prohibit the feds from coming in and taking over elections, but there is a clear federal law rooted in civil rights history that prohibits federal agents who are armed from being at polling places. It's a bright line prohibition. And not only that, but in Maine law, no person, it says person, may interfere with another's right to vote or influence another's right to vote. And no person may be behind the guardrail, which is in Waterville just the tables, without the express consent of the warden. So it would be illegal for them to try. And so we won't let them. And I think that's really important, that sometimes we lose sight of it. We should not be giving Trump power he does not have. And I will tell you, other secretaries across the country agree with me. And we're in conversations every single day. And we are doing contingency planning. We're doing scenario planning. We're talking to the Office of the Attorney General, to law enforcement leaders. We're really thinking about, okay, if this happens, then what? And I'm not going to publish it on the front page of the Press Herald or put it online or even do a selfie video about it. But I and the other secretaries and election officials all across this country are working really hard to protect our elections. There will be free, safe, and secure elections in 2026 because we will make it so. That's what's going to happen.
Thank you for all that you have been doing for the last 20-some years to make sure that we have not just free and fair elections, but the kinds of things that make Maine the way, life in Maine the way we want it to be. But what I worry most about in the election is the software manipulation that we've already heard about for the last 2024, where votes for Kamala Harris didn't exist when the Democrats down the ballot won. There's no way to know for somebody like me whether this is AI-generated information about these things, but I would love to hear what your thoughts are on keeping the software that's used not here but in other states from manipulation.
So first, let me say, I do believe that that is maliciously generated misinformation designed to scare people and tell them that voting doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So let me be crystal clear about that. Why do I believe that? because over 96% of the ballots used in this country are paper ballots. The only states that are still doing electronic voting at all are Alaska and Louisiana, and those weren't swing states, right? So they're still using some of those machines that are literally touchscreen machines, and the votes stay in the machine. Everybody else is using a paper ballot. Almost every state, I think it's 47 of them, I think the Dakotas don't, do a post-election audit where they do random samplings of the ballots and they check the results against the election night results. And the standards for the post-election audits, I served actually on a vote verification committee with equal numbers of Republican and Democratic secretaries of state in 2022 to come up with standards for post-election audits that we adopted unanimously. So I can say with certainty that those post-election audits comply with those standards. And those machines, and there's some rumors, right? Like, Dominion just got sold to a Republican Trump donor, right? And so there are rumors about, okay, what happens to the machines? But every state does something called logic and accuracy tests. And this is a fancy name for something that's pretty simple. These machines are air-gapped. They're not connected to the internet ever. They don't have Wi-Fi connections. And so when you test them, what you're doing, so the states program a memory stick for these machines so that it reads the state-specific ballot. And these tests that each state does, these logic and accuracy tests, are to make sure that the machine count is verified against what you would expect. In Maine, what we literally do, we have volunteers fill out ballots, run them through the machine, and test that it is producing the result that we know from those paper ballots that we see. We use it with test ballots. In Maine, we then ship those machines. Those machines go to the towns. We actually send the sticks to the towns that we've programmed, and they test them on the ground with a similar program. They use test ballots that we send to them to test the results against what they would expect. And they do that. They have to say when they're going to do that, and you can go observe it. And that process is used all across the country, this idea of logic and accuracy testing. So for the manipulation of the results in the tabulators, which are like modern day abacuses, right? I always say it's like, Liz, I don't know if anybody remembers those little things. Yeah, right? So for anybody to interfere, now those machines on election day are in full view of everybody, right? You're all there, you're putting your ballots in, right? Like, so somebody would have to go up behind the machine and like change it. And that is really not possible to change a whole presidential election. I do think Kamala Harris suffered from a very short runway to run. Huge anger at the economic realities that our country is in that have only gotten worse. And a lot of anger about Biden. And I think that, all of those factors conspired for her to lose in certain places where local Democrats were more popular, right? The fact that Shenna Bellows and Donald Trump won, in certain years, I think that's indicative of how people do still split their tickets in some places. So unfortunately, I think that's what was going on. So this year, and here's where Republican states and Democratic states differ. And then we have one more question, and then I'm happy to stick around and talk to folks. But the big difference is Republicans don't want everybody to vote. This goes back to your question about ID. What's the most likely scenario that will harm voting in Maine? Congress passes the SAVE Act and requires everybody to demonstrate their proof of citizenship. Now, who has a passport in this room? Y'all will be fine.
Yeah.
You can bring your passport to the polls, you're going to be fine. Who has a real ID? You will also be fine. Who doesn't have a passport or a real ID? Okay, this room, everybody's great. So the issue is going to be for people who don't have access to a passport or a real ID. And then they're going to need their birth certificate, but it's going to need to be an official birth certificate. And if you're a married woman who's changed her name, like 85% of married women currently in America have, you're going to need your marriage certificate. I had a woman, she's 72, she sent me a very angry email last week. I am a 72-year-old lifelong Democrat. She's been married twice. She's like, I can't find my marriage certificate from 51 years ago. It's going to take me forever to track it down. I'm not even married, I don't know, she went on and on. I'm not even married to that guy anymore. Why do I need it? well, it's a federal requirement under the Real ID. And so what I had to tell her is like, I'm sorry, you got to go track it down. And it's going to take her months. Now imagine if she was coming to vote. She voted her whole life. And she showed up, and they were like, sorry, you need that first marriage certificate that showed how you changed your name from your birth certificate to your current name.
And the divorce decree.
And the divorce decree, depending on the circumstances. So that's the concern I have, is that Congress will pass the SAVE Act, and then suddenly people will be turned away from the polls. That's what you see in red states. They limit where you can vote. They limit where you can vote in the South and African American communities, and they have lots of places to vote if you're in white communities, right? They limit who can vote. They have certain in Texas, like you can show your gun license, but not your student ID, right? Those are the types of things that are truly nefarious that do happen, but the interference of the results, like scandal, it's just science fiction. So.
My question is also about ICE, but we recently had them in Waterville, and I know we have a lot of international students. How would you, as governor, address that?
Yeah. So the Secretary of State is not part of the governor's administration in Maine. In Maine, the Secretary of State is completely independent, elected by the legislature. What I've proposed as governor, what I would do, I would turn the Office of New Americans into something more substantive. I think the networks of mutual aid that sprang up, the government should be involved in that. The governor's office should be there on the ground helping those networks of mutual aid. The governor's office should use the Office of New Americans to send legal observers into communities where there are ICE reportings to figure out what's going on, to interview them, to figure out who they are, to demand information. The governor's office should be helping track down people if they're detained and then shipped out of state so we can help connect them back to their families and to their own personal attorneys. Those are some of the things I would do as governor. I also think, as secretary, I have a meeting every 2 weeks with democracy advocates to hear from the coalition what's going on, what do I need to know, what are people saying, and what do the people need to hear from me. That's how I learned that League of Women Voters wasn't allowed to go to the naturalization ceremonies anymore to register new citizens. You know what we did? My staff started to go because they can't keep the Secretary of State out of the naturalization ceremonies. So every week, my staff goes and registers voters. So I think the other... we also go register voters at the Maine State Prison because in Maine, every citizen can vote, even people that are incarcerated. So what I would do as governor is I would make sure that one of my cabinet members or one of my staffers was meeting every couple of weeks with immigration advocates. I was a founding member of Maine Immigrants' Rights Coalition, and I worked really closely with them to get their own 501c3, to set up their board and hire their first executive director. I think the governor's office should be meeting with the Maine Immigrants' Rights Coalition and all the community-based organizations on a regular basis to hear what's happening, because you're right. Like, sure, the surge ended, but ICE is still here. People are still getting disappeared. And today, I was working on this issue. We've really got to change our towing policy. So I run the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. And what did I learn? That when ICE seizes somebody on the road, if a tow truck takes their vehicle, then the towing company can file as an abandoned vehicle and take their vehicle under Maine law. We've got to fix that. So what did I do? I paused on those applications so that I could get the word out to the lawyers and the immigrant advocates to say, please, let us know if you have a client whose vehicle, is missing, so you can file with us and we can put a pause on that process, because people didn't know where their vehicles were getting taken and they were just losing them. So I think just thinking about one thing as governor I would do is stay really close to the grassroots so that if there are problems like that, we can fix them. And that's something I think, having been a lifelong organizer, that's something that makes me a little different than my competitors in the governor's race.
Thank you so much, Shenna, for coming.
Thank you. Can I make one closing remark? Okay, so we're in a really difficult time. I used to be head of the Holocaust and Human Rights Center in Maine, so I've studied a lot of Holocaust history. In fact, it's Passover tonight, and I think there are people that would have been here that couldn't because they're celebrating the holiday, which is really important. And go back. FDR is just elected, right? the beginning of the Great Depression. It's the early 1930s. The stock market had crashed. There was record unemployment. At least 1 in 3 Americans didn't have a job. People were, starving. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt gets elected. And there's a woman with ties to Maine, Frances Perkins, and she writes a list. She says, I think if you lose your job, you should get a check from the government called unemployment compensation. I think if you get sick or injured on the job or killed on the job, you should get a check from the government called workers' compensation. I think if you're 65 or older and you can't work anymore, you should get a check from the government, and we'll call it Social Security. She said, I think you should only have to work 40 hours a week, and if you work more than 40 hours a week, you should get overtime. She said, I think we should have universal health care. It's the one thing she didn't get. What I'm saying is, she had these big ideas, right? These very big ideas. So she made this list. She called it Practical Possibilities. And she sent it to President Roosevelt, who had just been elected. And she said, this is what you need to do. The country's economy was in the toilet. There was no money. And he's like, these are good ideas. This is what we need to do. He said, come be my Department of Labor secretary. And she did, and together, they got all of those things done, and they ushered in the greatest era of economic prosperity our nation has ever seen that lasted for over 50 years. Yeah. So what I'm proposing is not only will I fight back against Donald Trump, but I'm going to implement a New Deal for Maine, a list of practical possibilities to move forward a better future for our entire state. Thank you very much.